The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the wall. Shadows that danced like phantoms in our meagre cottage. My sister, Gretel, sat across from me, her eyes reflecting the firelight with an unnerving intensity. We were alone, as we often were. Father was out, seeking work or perhaps solace in the village tavern. He rarely spoke of his troubles, but the lines etched on his face spoke volumes. The air hung heavy with the silence of our empty stomachs. Days had passed since our last proper meal, and the gnawing hunger was a constant companion. Gretel, ever resourceful, had managed to scavenge a few berries from the nearby woods, but they did little to satisfy the ache in our bellies. As darkness enveloped the cottage, a chill settled in my bones. It was more than just the cold seeping in through the cracks in the walls. It was a fear, primal and instinctive, that whispered of dangers lurking just beyond the firelight. And in the depths of Gretel's eyes, I saw a flicker of something that sent shivers down my spine. It was a look of steely determination, a resolve that spoke of a darkness I had never seen in her before. Days turned into weeks, each one a struggle for survival. Hunger gnawed at our insides, a constant, painful reminder of our plight. Father, his spirit broken by hardship, seemed resigned to our fate. He would sit by the fire, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. He barely spoke, his silence a heavy weight that pressed down on us. Gretel, however, refused to surrender. She became our protector, our provider. She would disappear into the woods for hours, returning with a handful of berries or roots. She never complained, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. Her once round cheeks were now hollow, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Father returned from the village. He carried himself differently, a newfound energy in his step. His eyes, though bloodshot and weary, held a glimmer of hope. He had spoken to our stepmother, he told us, and she had agreed to take us in. My heart sank. Our stepmother was a woman of wealth and privilege, but her heart was as cold and hard as the jewels she wore around her neck. She had never cared for us, seeing us as nothing more than a burden, a drain on her resources. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was no act of kindness. This was a solution born of desperation, a last resort, and I feared what price we would be made to pay for it. The forest was a place of shadows and whispers, of hidden dangers and forgotten paths. We walked in silence, Gretel and I, our small hands clasped tightly together. Father led the way. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped with defeat. The sun, a pale disk through the dense canopy of leaves, did little to penetrate the gloom that seemed to cling to us like a shroud. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a clearing, and there, in the midst of the shadowy woods, stood a sight that made my heart leap with both wonder and trepidation. It was a cottage, small and whimsical, as if plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Its walls were crafted from gingerbread, its roof adorned with sugar-coated tiles that shimmered in the dappled sunlight. The windows, made of glistening candy glass, glowed with an ethereal light. The aroma that wafted from the cottage was intoxicating, a heady mix of sugar and spice, of warm bread and candied fruits. My stomach, empty for so long, growled in protest. Gretel, however, remained strangely silent. She stood beside me, her small hand gripping mine with surprising strength, her eyes fixed on the gingerbread house with an unreadable expression. "Go on, children," Father urged, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "Go and see what wonders await you inside." He gave us a weary smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was a sadness there, a resignation that filled me with unease. I wanted to turn back, to run back through the forest and never look back. But the allure of the gingerbread house was too strong, the promise of food and shelter too tempting to resist. And so, with a heart full of foreboding, I allowed Gretel to lead me towards the sugary facade, unaware of the horrors that awaited us within. The interior of the gingerbread house was a feast for the senses. Walls were lined with shelves piled high with sweets, bonbons and caramels, sugared plums and candied apples. A chocolate fountain bubbled merrily in the corner, its rich aroma mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread. In the centre of the room, a table groaned under the weight of a lavish spread. Roasted meats, plump sausages and bowls overflowing with creamy custards and berry tarts. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Seated in a rocking chair by the fire was an old woman. She was small and wizened, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and age spots. Her eyes, however, were bright and sharp, like those of a bird of prey. She smiled at us, revealing a set of surprisingly even white teeth. "Welcome, children," she croaked, her voice surprisingly strong. "I am so glad you could join me." She gestured towards the table. "Please eat your fill, there's plenty for everyone." I hesitated, my senses overwhelmed. It was too much, too good to be true. Gretel, however, seemed unfazed. She pulled me towards the table and urged me to sit down. She piled our plates high with food, her eyes sparkling with a strange light. The old woman watched us eat, a pleased smile on her face. "You must be weary from your journey," she said. "Stay as long as you need. This house is yours." Her words were kind, her tones soothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that coiled in the pit of my stomach. There was something about the old woman, something in her eyes, that filled me with a deep, primal fear. And as I looked at Gretel, her face illuminated by the firelight, I saw a flicker of something cold and calculating in her eyes that mirrored my own fear. Section 5. A Sister's Resolve. The days that followed passed in a blur of sugary indulgence and growing unease. The old woman, whom we came to call Mother Agatha, treated us with a strange mix of kindness and possessiveness. She showered us with gifts, new clothes, toys, and an endless supply of sweets. She told us stories, sang us songs, and tucked us into bed each night with a kiss on the forehead. Yet beneath her veneer of grandmotherly affection, I sensed a darkness lurking. Her eyes, sharp and watchful, followed our every move. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and there was a coldness in her touch that sent shivers down my spine. Gretel, however, seemed unperturbed. She had taken to Mother Agatha with surprising ease, her laughter echoing through the gingerbread house. She listened attentively to the old woman's stories, her eyes wide with wonder, but I noticed something else in her gaze, something that sent a chill down my spine. It was a look of calculation, of assessment, as if she was studying Mother Agatha, learning her secrets. One night, as I lay awake in bed, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty, I heard a soft whisper coming from Gretel's bed. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Gretel was sitting up in bed, her back to me, her voice barely audible. "Don't worry, brother," she whispered, her voice cold and steady. "I have a plan." Section 6. Sweet Revenge. The witch's oven, once a source of such delight, became a symbol of my nightmares. The sweet, cloying aroma of baking bread transformed into a sinister harbinger. Gretel, ever observant, had discovered Mother Agatha's secret ingredient, a rare herb ground into a fine powder that could induce a death-like slumber. I watched, my stomach churning, as Gretel carefully measured the potent powder. Her small hands, once sticky with sweets, moved with a chilling precision. Her face, illuminated by the flickering candlelight, held a mask of cold determination. Gone was the innocent child who had marvelled at the gingerbread house. In her place stood a stranger, hardened by fear and fueled by a chilling resolve. "Sweetbread," she murmured, her voice devoid of emotion. "Mother Agatha's favourite." The irony was not lost on me. Sweetbread, a dish made from the pancreas of a calf, was meant to be a delicacy. In Mother Agatha's hands it became a tool of control, a way to keep us trapped in her web of sugary deception. Now it would be her undoing. The air hung heavy with the weight of our unspoken plan. We moved with a silent synchronicity, our steps muffled by the thick rugs that adorned the gingerbread house's floor. The scent of baking bread filled the air, a cloying reminder of the danger that lurked within these walls. We were no longer innocent children, lured by the promise of sweets. We were predators, lying in wait, ready to strike. Section 7. A Feast of Lies. The table was set, a white linen tablecloth, crisp and inviting, fine china plates adorned with delicate floral patterns, silver cutlery polished to a gleam. Mother Agatha, dressed in her finest gown, sat at the head of the table, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Come, children," she beckoned, her voice warm and inviting. "Tonight we feast." Gretel and I took our places at the table, our movements stiff and unnatural, my heart hammered in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. I could barely meet Mother Agatha's gaze, afraid she would see the fear and guilt that churned within me. The sweetbread, golden brown and glistening, sat in the centre of the table, its aroma both enticing and repulsive. Mother Agatha served us generous portions, her smile widening as she watched us take our first bites. I forced myself to swallow, the taste of sugar and spice turning acrid on my tongue. Across from me, Gretel ate with a detached calmness that belied the turmoil I knew must be raging within her. As Mother Agatha savoured her own portion of sweetbread, a strange look crossed her face. Her eyes widened, her pupils dilating. Her hand flew to her throat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at us, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and betrayal. Then, with a final shuddering breath, she slumped back in her chair, her eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. Silence descended upon the gingerbread house, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the frantic beating of my own heart. Mother Agatha lay still, her chest no longer rising and falling. The sweetbread, her weapon of choice, had become her undoing. Section 8. The Weight of Silence. The gingerbread house, once a place of enchantment, now felt like a tomb. We moved through its sugary rooms like ghosts, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The scent of baking bread, once so alluring, now clung to the air like a curse. We packed our meagre belongings, our movements mechanical, our faces blank masks of shock and exhaustion. The weight of what we had done pressed down on us, threatening to crush us beneath its enormity. As we stepped out of the gingerbread house and into the forest, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the canopy of leaves. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It felt like a cleansing breath after the cloying sweetness of the gingerbread house. We didn't speak as we made our way through the forest, our footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The silence between us was thick with unspoken words, with the shared burden of our crime. I glanced at Gretel, her small figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, but her chin was held high, her shoulders squared. The fear and uncertainty I had seen in her eyes had been replaced by a chilling resolve. The forest, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where we could hide from the consequences of our actions. But I knew, deep down, that we could never truly escape the darkness that had taken root within us. The gingerbread house may have been left behind, but its shadow would follow us forever. Section 9. Soft as poisoned sweetbread. We returned to the village, two lost children claiming to have stumbled upon the witch's abandoned cottage. The villagers, ever eager for a fantastical tale, believed our story. They celebrated our survival, praising our bravery. They never suspected the truth that lay hidden beneath our carefully crafted facade. Life went on. The seasons changed, the years passed. The memory of the gingerbread house faded, becoming a distant nightmare. Yet the darkness that had taken root within us remained. Gretel blossomed. She was no longer the timid, frightened child who had followed me into the woods. She was confident, assertive, her beauty tinged with a hint of steel. She was admired, envied, feared. But beneath her charming exterior, I glimpsed the same cold calculation that had chilled me to the bone in the gingerbread house. As for me, I lived in the shadow of our shared secret. The fear, the guilt, the weight of our sin never truly left me. I became withdrawn, introspective, haunted by the memory of Mother Agatha's dying eyes. One evening, as we sat together in the fading light, Gretel turned to me, a strange smile playing on her lips. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shuddered, my gaze drawn to the flickering flames in the hearth. "Every day," I confessed, my voice hoarse with unshed tears. Gretel laughed, a chillingly beautiful sound. She was a monster, she said, her voice devoid of remorse. She deserved what she got. I looked at my sister, truly looked at her, for perhaps the first time since our return from the gingerbread house. And in that moment, I realized the terrible truth. Gretel was no longer the victim, the innocent child caught in a web of horror. She had embraced the darkness, had made it her own. And in doing so, she had become something far more terrifying than the witch we had left for dead in the gingerbread house. "Yes, sister," I whispered, my voice trembling. She did. And as I looked into Gretel's cold, calculating eyes, I knew that the nightmare was far from over. It had only just begun. For my sister, my sweet, beautiful Gretel, had always had a soft heart, soft as poisoned sweetbread.